Xbox is a very interesting brand. Looking at it today, it is definitely still there, but it feels like the true heart of Xbox has long since rotted away. And the only thing left is a generic Microsoft gaming console. This feels like a post-mortem. Granted, it's not really a post-mortem. The Series S and X have sold a combined total of 29 million units. I mean, in comparison, the OG Xbox sold around 24 million units during the 4 years of its life. Not that far behind the Series S and X, which have been on the market for around the same time. And it's kind of shocking, isn't it? When Xbox started off in 2001, in 4 years they managed to sell only a couple million units less than what the well-established Xbox brand sold now. Meanwhile, the Xbox 360 sold 84 million units, and the Xbox One sold a total of 60 million. So what happened? We should start at the beginning first. Nintendo's betrayal of Sony in the early 90s spawned not only one rival for Nintendo, but two. While Sega was struggling to survive, Sony's PlayStation 1 was thriving, and they were planning to launch a second one. Microsoft feared something truly horrifying, that Sony would control the people's living rooms. Sony TVs, Sony consoles, Sony hi-fi systems. There would soon be no place for anyone else, and no place especially for Microsoft. So in 1999, they got cooking. They decided to take their PC building knowledge and build what essentially was a cut-down PC, utilizing their DirectX API, as developers were already very well versed on how to utilize it. Xbox took a lot of design ideas from the failing Dreamcast, like the controller, and Sega even put some of the games they were planning to release on the Dreamcast as exclusives on the Xbox. And it worked! The console smelled like a PC in so many aspects that developing on it and porting to it felt pretty natural for a lot of developers. It only sold around 24 million units, but it was still a huge success for Xbox. Not only did huge games like Halo or Fable release on it, but it also got ports of games like Half-Life 2 and Morrowind, which were only really possible because of the Xbox's architecture. And this design plan continued. The 360's design is pretty reminiscent of the GameCube in a few places, but it was still pretty easy to program for in a lot of aspects, meaning that its 3-core CPU and more conventional GPU wasn't very difficult to program on. As a side note, the Red Ring of Death was pretty famous on these early systems, but due to what I can only imagine is some form of divine intervention, all launch 360 models and all launch PS3 models are defective. Yeah, some of them still work today, but they all used the wrong combination of solder and solder underfill. This ended up making the solder balls crack after going through a lot of thermal cycles. Thermal cycles that you have by playing a game, then not playing it, then playing it again. If you have one of these bad boys and you want it to live longer, try installing some kind of homebrew that lets you increase the fan speed and regularly cleaning it. That way, the temperature on the die is decreased and the balls stress less, so there's a lesser chance of them cracking. While developers were struggling to come to grips with the Enigma machine Sony labeled as the PS3, many unique and amazing titles came to the 360. Halo 3 was insanely huge. Gears of War was huge as well. Back in the day, people kept memeing that the PS3 had no games because early on, it really struggled to find its footing. But then at some point, something changed. What changed? In short, the Kinect. But how could that be? Let me explain. It's not the Kinect itself per se, but what it represents. You see, the Kinect's launch symbolized just how little the people at Xbox cared for their core audience. You see, this was basically a clone of the Wii's motion system. The Wii's main appeal to wider audiences was the fact it was relatively cheap and had motion controls that worked alongside regular controls. The Wiimote and Nunchuck may have been a bit much at times, but you could still use them simultaneously to have the precision necessary to play complex games, while using just enough motion to improve your experience past what a traditional controller would be capable of. In Battalion Wars 2, for instance, you can flick your nunchuck to roll in a specific direction, while you can aim with your pointer and use the Wiimote to control your units. The controls may have not aged the best, but they allowed a coexistence of more hardcore precise games and the more simple casual games. The Kinect just wasn't that. You need to use your entire body, which means you'd lose the precision a stick and a button would grant for you. For this, the Pro Gamer Box, which is how Xbox branded itself since the very beginning, ended up trying to tap into a new market it had no business being in, the exclusively casual market. And even worse, it worked! Kinect Adventures sold 24 million units worldwide, making it the best-selling game on the system, and other Kinect games also sold quite a bit. The Kinect itself sold 35 million units, which meant that for an add-on, it was a huge success. And this gave Microsoft the idea that this strategy worked, but it wouldn't. So after the Kinect launched, the later years of the 360 became kind of boring. It was just more of the same. You see, the early Xbox had a lot of interesting and unique games. Lost Odyssey, Spectral Force 3, Blue Dragon, Concept Saga, and others. They were all exclusive JRPGs on an Xbox system, something almost unheard of. But later on in the 360's life, it mostly just had multi-platform titles, and the new Gears of War game or the new Forza game was similar. Xbox was essentially becoming more homogeneous, and Microsoft was trying less and less to get unique, exclusive games onto their platform. Meanwhile, many third-party developers had gotten the hang of the PlayStation 3 by the time the Kinect was announced, and high-quality games finally started to come out for the system. Meanwhile, on the first-party front, especially in the later years, Sony just kept pumping out game after game, exclusive after exclusive. Hell, high-quality games like The Last of Us came out in 2013, the same year the PS4 was coming out. And that got people to buy a PS3 right before the PS4 launched. Sony was really trying their hardest to win. On the Wii front, the Wii's huge spike in sales it had between its launch and early 2010 was finally ending, as it was kinda being seen as a fad by a lot of people. A ton of the more popular Wii games had already come out, and Nintendo was launching their next system a bit before the rest of the competition, but let's not talk about the Wii U. Let's instead talk about the launch of the Xbox One, and oh boy was it a complete fucking disaster. So before the launch even happened, leaks suggested that the new system will have a new Kinect, cloud gaming, more options to watch media, and the inability to play used games. Later on, people also heard rumors that the console would be always online, and then the unveiling came out, which made everything worse. They spent half an hour focusing on all of the cool multimedia capabilities of this black gaming box. It was an all-around, all-in-one entertainment device, you know? Like the thing the PS3 tried to be, then failed and focused on games later on. But then they also said every game would be connected to your Xbox Live account, and you could share your games with up to 10 family members, and you could trade in your games or resell them if the publishers allow you to, only at specific retailers, and you need to sync your system every 24 hours to the Xbox servers, otherwise you couldn't actually play any of the games you have, and if you don't have internet, well, you can play the 360. Also, the Kinect always came with the system, at least with the launch models, and originally, they planned it to force you to plug it in all the time, even though Microsoft did backtrack on that statement. And finally, PlayStation decided to win by showing how easy it is and simple to trade games with your friends by just giving them the damn disc like in the good old days. But also, the PlayStation was $100 cheaper. On the development side of things, the PS4 and Xbox One aren't that different internally. They both use similar custom chips from AMD, and overall, there's really not a significant difference between developing for each system, though it's also definitely not identical, especially on the API side of things. So what games did the Xbox have now? Well, okay, Xbox had some exclusives early on. Halo 5 was not liked that much. The other games were just kind of okay. The Xbox brand still had a lot of steam due to the 360 days, but that steam was starting to not be enough. Speaking of Steam and PC gaming, in 2016, Xbox Play Anywhere brought all Xbox games to PC. Yeah. This and Game Pass would prove to be some big issues on their next system, and we'll get to you soon, my dear. But for now, it seemed like a really cool deal. Don't have an Xbox? You don't need it. They also launched the Xbox Game Pass in 2017, something that would also cause arguably far more issues on the Series S and X. Speaking of the Series X, and also I guess the PS5, internally, they're still very similar, though maybe arguably not as much. You see, developing on the Series X is kinda harder, because you need to make sure that any game on the Series X is also uncompromised on the weaker Series S, which means that some games just aren't ported to the Series X, because they just wouldn't work on the Series S. Developers need to spend more time making sure the game works on both systems. Now, granted, the PS5 Pro is gonna release at some point in time, I think, and developers would probably have to, or at least be recommended to by Sony, to patch their games so that the existing games you had ran better on the PS5 Pro versus the PS5. But it is far easier to just change a few lines of code to make it run at a higher frame rate or resolution if the game engine supports it, than it is to crunch a game down to run on weaker hardware. But hey, the Xbox Series S is kinda cheap. But you know what's also cheap, more versatile, and has far more exclusives? The Switch. Yeah, it doesn't run COD, but it still runs a ton of multiplats, along with a massive exclusive library which dwarfs that of the PS5. By the way, these consoles have a disastrous name, Series S, Series X. Come on. Okay, the Xbox One name was arguably far worse because now you have to call the original Xbox the OG Xbox. But that's not the most disastrous thing about these new systems. You see, the main reason these systems really haven't been selling is because people don't care. You see, PC gaming really took off in the 2010s, and even though the Series S, X, and PS5 are quite affordable compared to a similarly powered PC, or especially laptop, they have some flaws. While people meme about the PS5 having no games, which is partially true, people don't meme about the Xbox having no games because it's just accepted as a fact. Realistically, if you threw together a solid PC part picker build, it would cost you a bit under twice as much as a Series X. However, unlike a Series X, you can not only play PC games on it, but you can play basically the entire Xbox library. And you can also play the Sony games that release on PC but not on Xbox. And the Game Pass, it just seems like a terrible deal for Microsoft. Even though it's really great for you, it's being enshittified now for a pretty interesting reason. You see, people will just pay the price of the 2 AAA games per year to play games on Game Pass, because chances are they'll be playing way more than just 2 AAA games per year. This is also a brilliant choice for reviewers or YouTubers, but this is a fucking horrible deal for Microsoft, and especially for the developers. as now far fewer people are actually paying to play their games. Many new small releases didn't really sell that well because it's released on the same day on Game Pass, so why buy it? Just play the game on Game Pass, and maybe if you care, later on, you'll buy it once it's no longer on Game Pass. This decision also devalued how a lot of the Xbox owners and PC players as well viewed their games. If Game Pass was taken away, I'm sure a lot of people would protest if they had to pay $60 or $70 per game again, instead of just paying a small monthly fee. In a way, Xbox played themselves. So what killed Xbox? It was a series of bad decisions which compounded with each other to create a hurricane of bad. First, they really didn't do enough to make sure that unique, interesting, and varied games came to the 360. Instead, they focused on a Wii-like add-on, but worse, to attract the casual crowds. Then, they choke on the launch of the Xbox One, because they also wanted to make it a multimedia box for everyone. Then they end up clawing back some market share because of the brand image of Xbox. Then Halo turns into a mess where most people talk about it in the past tense, and they still lose basically all their exclusives with the Xbox Play Anywhere idea, which then caused huge issues later on alongside with Game Pass, because now not only do people actually see each AAA game as being a $60 value, they just see it as something on Game Pass, but also, the Game Pass would be cheaper to just play on PC. So, why would you buy an Xbox? You can play all the same games. The solution? Why are you asking me? I don't know. They're so far down, deep in the rabbit hole, that, like, I guess you could make good games exclusive for the Xbox and just deal with the backlash by not putting them onto Game Pass, I guess? But considering the vibes, I have a feeling that's a decision they're not gonna make. Honestly, I feel the most shocking part of all of this while researching is that there are people who are fanboys of Xbox. And I'm not talking like fans of the 360. I get that. Fans of the OG Xbox, I also get that. There are a lot of cool games that released on both. Fans of the Xbox One, I guess they really like Halo 5. But like, fans of the Series S and X. I guess a final point I should throw in at the end here is that performance doesn't really sell systems that much. The Switch has sold so many units, and it's like a 360 with more RAM and a somewhat faster GPU. Overall, it is kind of interesting to watch how many people, specifically on Twitter, complain that the new Avowed game is gonna run at 30 FPS while looking fucking gorgeous, and then no one who's actually gonna play it will care. Trust me, the average person has that really shitty motion smoothing on their TV turned on anyways, and people just won't notice. Also, the average person's TV isn't really that high quality, it's just like a generic 4K panel. It's fine, but, you know. Overall, I guess I shouldn't mention Mega Man Legends again. Suffer in Starbound. There you go.